I was 40 miles up the wrong end of nowhere with 2 hands gone and a winter coming, and I'd have told you I was done needing anybody, until the wagon rattled into my yard carrying a half-starved widow nobody else in 3 counties would hire, and she climbed down before the wheels had stopped and asked me where the work was. I didn't answer her. I stood on the porch with my arms crossed and let the silence do the talking, the way my brother Caleb used to say a man ought to when he wanted somebody gone. The wind off the ironwoods came down cold even in September, and it pushed her thin skirts flat against her legs and lifted a strand of dark hair across her face, and she didn't reach up to fix it. She just looked at me, steady, like she'd been looked at hard before, and had decided a long time ago that it wouldn't move her. "You're Mr. Thorne," she said, "not a question." "I am. You put a notice in the Mercantile at Halloran's Bend. Help wanted, the Two Pines outfit, wages and a bunk." She pulled a folded square of paper out of her coat and held it up like she meant to make me account for it. "I've come for the work." I'd written that notice 3 weeks back, the night after Prout and the Dolan boy loaded their kit and rode out without so much as a handshake, and I'd nailed it to the board half drunk and full of spite, certain some hard-luck cowhand would drift in before the snow. What I'd gotten instead was nothing. 3 weeks of nothing, and the cattle scattering up the high draws, and the hay only half in, and the creek dam I'd built with Caleb starting to give it the spillway. And now a woman. "Notices for hand," I said. "A man." "It says help." She didn't fold the paper back up. She held it there between us in the wind. "You don't have any." That stung because it was true, and a true thing said plain by a stranger has a way of getting under the hide. I came down off the porch then, slow, the way you'd come at a green horse, and I looked her over the way the town had no doubt looked her over before they sent her up the mountain just to be rid of her. She wasn't but 100 pounds soaking wet. Her wrists were thin as a child's. There was a hollow under her cheekbones that told me she hadn't eaten regular in a good while, and her boots were a man's boots, too big, stuffed at the toes with rag. She wasn't anything you'd pick to throw against a high-country winter. She looked like a hard wind would carry her off. "What's your name?" I said. "Cora Vane." "Vane? You got a husband, Mrs. Vane." Something passed behind her eyes quick and was gone. "I had one. He's under the ground at Camas Hollow with the fever that took him and the both of our wages with it. I've got no husband, no money, and no people. That's why I'm standing in your yard and not some kinder place." She lifted her chin. "I can cook. I can keep a house. I can ride, and I can rope a steer that doesn't want roping, and I've calved out more cows in a march than you'd believe of me to look at me. I'm not asking you to take pity. I'm asking you to take work off a man who plainly hasn't got hands to do it. I'll tell you the truth, because I'm an old man now and there's no profit left in lying about who I was." I laughed at her. It wasn't a kind sound. It came up out of the same black place that everything came out of that year, the place where Caleb had been and wasn't anymore, and it landed on her like a slap. I saw it land. I saw her go still all over, the way a deer goes still, and I was ashamed even as I did it and too far gone in my own meanness to stop. "Mrs. Vane," I said, "this ain't a kitchen. This is 1,000 acres of bad ground and worse weather, and I've got near 300 head scattered from here to the timber that need bringing down before the snow buries them. I had 2 men quit on me because the work broke them. Grown men. You'll be on the wagon back to town inside a week, and I'll have fed you for nothing, and I haven't got nothing to spare. So I'll thank you to turn that team around." The teamster who'd hauled her up, a sour fellow named Ostrander who ran the freight road and would have charged his own mother for the air, leaned off his seat and spat and said, "Told her same, Thorne. Whole town's got money down she won't see Sunday. I'll wait while she gets back up." And there it was, laid out plain. They'd made a wager of her in the saloon at Halloran's Bend. They'd taken a destitute widow with nowhere to go and turned her into a bet, the way men do when they're bored and a person's misfortune is more entertaining than their own. I knew how that worked. I'd lost money on worse. Cora Vane looked at Ostrander, and then she looked back at me, and she did the thing that I have thought about every day of my life since. She bent down, picked up her one carpetbag and a flour sack tied at the neck, and she carried them past me, up my own porch steps, and set them down by my own door. Then she turned around. "You can put me on the wagon," she said, "if you've got the strength to carry me down it, because I won't walk. Or you can let me work and dock my keep against my wages, and put me back in town in the spring with what I've earned if I haven't earned my place by then. I'll take the bunkhouse or the barn loft. It's all the same to me. But I'm not riding back down that mountain to be laughed at by a saloon full of men who haven't done a day's honest work between the lot of them." Her voice didn't shake. That's what I remember. A woman with nothing, on the edge of a winter that killed stronger than her every year, and her voice didn't shake. "Try the work I'll do for a week, Mr. Thorne. If I'm what you say I am, you'll know by Saturday and you can carry me down then. What's a week against everything you've got to lose?" Ostrander snorted and gathered his lines. "Your funeral, missus." He turned the team and rattled off down the grade, and the dust of him hung gold in the late light. And then it was just the two of us and the wind and 300 head of cattle I had no earthly way of bringing in alone. I have asked myself 100 times why I let her stay. I've told it different ways at different times. I've said I was too tired to fight her. I've said I figured she'd quit on her own and save me the trouble. But the truth, the real truth, is that when she said what's a week against everything you've got to lose, she'd named the thing I lay awake with every night. That I was going to lose the 2 pines, lose the ground Caleb and I had bled into, lose the only thing left in the world that still had his hand's mark on it, and no man in that whole valley had had the spine to say it to my face. Only a starving woman they'd made a joke of. "Barn loft's dry," I said. "Stove's in the kitchen. You burn my supper, you're walking down." I went to see to the horses so I wouldn't have to watch her face, but I heard it anyhow, a sound I hadn't heard on that place in a year. The screen door and her step inside it, and then, soft, the clatter of someone laying a fire in a cold kitchen as if it were already her own. But she had biscuits and a pot of beans with the last of my salt pork on the table before the dark was full down, and I ate them standing up out of pure stubbornness, like sitting at my own table with her in the room was a thing I could refuse. They were good. They were better than anything I'd put in my mouth since Caleb died, and I'd quit caring whether food was food. I didn't tell her that. I set the plate in the wash water and said, "Up before light. We ride for the high draws. You can't keep my pace, you say so, and we turn back and you're on the next freight." "Before light," she said, "I'll have coffee on." She did. I came in stiff and resentful out of the gray cold, and there was coffee, black and strong the way Caleb used to make it, and she was already dressed in those 2 big boots with her skirts pinned up out of the way and her hair bound back hard, and she had her own saddle slung over the corral rail. A worn old thing she'd carried up in the wagon bed, the one piece of her dead husband she'd kept, I'd learned later, when the fever doctors had taken everything else for the bills. I gave her the worst horse I had. I'll own that too. A flea-bitten gray gelding named Smoke that had thrown 3 men and bitten a 4th, and that I kept only because nobody'd pay me to take him off my hands. I let him out and held the bridle and waited for her to balk, and when she balked I'd have my reason to send her down, and I could tell myself it was her choice and not my meanness. She didn't balk. She walked up to that gray slow, talking low, and she put her hand flat on his neck and stood there a long while letting him smell her and lay his ears at her and decide what she was. And when he'd decided, she stepped into the worn stirrup of her dead husband's saddle and swung up easy as breathing. And the gray humped his back once to try her and then quit, because there was nothing in her seat for him to throw against. She'd gone soft and deep in the saddle the way only somebody raised to it can. She looked down at me holding the bridle I'd meant to hand her like a dare. "He's been hit," she said quietly. "Somebody hit him in the face. That's why he bites. He thinks the hand's coming before it comes." She gathered the reins. "He won't bite me." He didn't either. Not that morning nor any morning after. By the end of the winter, that ruined gray would follow her around the yard like a dog and put his head against her chest, and the hands who came later, for there were hands later, when there was money again to pay them, would shake their heads and say they'd never seen the like. But that was all ahead of me. That morning, I only knew that the worst horse on the place had taken to the worst hire on the place inside of 10 minutes, and that I'd run clean out of the easy way to be rid of her. We rode for the high draws. I rode hard on purpose, up the timber trails where the footing was bad and the cold bit through, and I waited for her to fall back or call out, and she did neither. She kept the gray a length off my off-shoulder, and she watched the country the way a person watches who knows what cattle do in it, and twice she saw sign before I did a churned bank where a bunch had watered, a thread of fresh trail up a draw I'd have ridden past. We pushed 30-odd head down out of the timber that first day, the two of us, working the wings of them through brush a man alone couldn't have held, and when one old mossy-horn cow broke and tried for the rocks, Cora Vane laid her loop over the horns at a dead run on a horse that hated the world and dallied off and turned that cow like she'd done it 10,000 times, which I expect she had. We didn't speak hardly at all. There wasn't breath for it. But coming down at dusk with the bunch strung out ahead of us bawling toward the home meadow, I caught her face in the last light, and there was something on it I hadn't reckoned to see, not triumph, nothing so cheap. It was the look of a person doing the thing she was made for after a long while of not being let to. It was the look of somebody who'd been told what she was so many times she'd half come to believe it, finding out up a cold mountain that the old true thing was still in her hands. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself back before. "That's 30, she said, when we'd shut the gate. Her voice was hoarse with cold and her hands were raw and she swayed a little getting down, more tired than she'd let me see all day. 270 to go, near enough. You can't do this 2 months running. I can do it as long as you can, she said. Longer, maybe. You eat like a man trying to die. And she went in to put supper on, and I stood out in the dark by the gate a long time, because she'd seen that too, that I'd been trying to die slow on this mountain ever since the river took my brother, and I didn't have the first idea what to do with a person who could see a thing like that and not flinch from it and just go in and cook me a meal anyhow. But Saturday came, the day the whole town had bet she'd be gone. I didn't carry her down it. I told myself it was the cattle. We weren't but a third through the gather and the weather was turning and I couldn't spare the day to haul her to town and back. That was true enough. But it wasn't the reason, and I think we both knew it, and neither of us said a word about the wager or the week, and the screen door stayed shut and her saddle stayed on the corral rail, and that was the whole of it. The week passed into a second week, the second into a third. I never did pay Ostrander's bet either way, and the saloon at Halloran's Bend, I heard much later, eventually just quit talking about it, the way a town will when the thing it laughed at refuses to be funny. She earned every meal twice over. I want that set down plain because I have spent years now hearing it told soft, hearing folks say, "Oh, the widow Thorne took in," like I did her a kindness, like I was the rugged, generous man of it. That isn't the shape of what happened. What happened is that a man too sunk in his own grief to save what his brother died building was saved by a woman. Everyone, including himself, had counted worthless. And the only kindness in the whole business for a long while ran one direction, and it didn't run from me. She mended the spillway on the creek dam. I'd looked at that spillway a dozen times and seen only the work of 2 men and known I hadn't 2 men, and so I'd let it go, the way I'd let everything go. Cora studied it one afternoon, walked the bank, and came back and told me it didn't need 2 men. It needed 1 woman and a winch and a different notion of how to set the gate, and she was right, and we set it her way in an afternoon, and it held through the spring melt when by rights it should have washed out and taken the lower hay with it. She found out where the strays had been going, a hidden bench up under the timber, good grass, that Caleb and I had never grazed because we'd never known it was there, and that she'd read out of the way the trails ran. We brought down 40 head off that bench that I'd have written off for dead by spring. And when the wolves came down out of the high country early that year, hungry ahead of the snow, and hit the cows just starting to calve in the home meadow, it was Cora who heard them first. I want to tell that night right. It was black, no moon, a wind out of the north with the first hard edge of winter in it. I woke to the cattle bawling wrong. There's a sound a cow makes that isn't any other sound, when she's standing over a downed calf and the dark is full of something that wants it. And by the time I'd got my boots and my rifle and made the yard, Cora was already out there. She'd not waited for me. She had a lantern and the old gray saddled bareback with just a hackamore, and she was riding the edge of the meadow, turning the herd in on itself, bunching them, getting the calves to the center where the cows could ring them. And she was doing it in the dark on a horse with no saddle and a wolf pack working the fringe. And her voice came across that black meadow steady as a church bell, low, talking the cattle down out of their panic so they'd hold instead of scatter, and give the wolves the running fight they wanted. I'd have shot into the dark and scattered everything. She knew better. Don't fire yet, she called to me, not loud, just carrying. You scatter them now and we lose half. Get to the timber side. They'll push from the timber. I did what she said. God knows why I did what she said. I'd run that meadow 20 years, but there was something in how she said it. The certainty of a person who has been in the dark with wolves before and lived. And I went to the timber side, and the wolves came from the timber just like she'd called it. 3 of them low and gray, and I dropped one and the other 2 broke off. And behind me the herd held. It held because she'd held it. We lost 1 calf that night, pulled half dead from the brush, and Cora sat up the rest of the dark in the kitchen with that calf wrapped in a horse blanket by the stove, feeding it warmed milk off a rag, and it lived. By morning it was butting at her hand for more, and she was gray-faced with no sleep, and she looked up at me from the floor where she sat with the foundling against her and said, "We'll want to bring the calving cows in closer to the buildings now. The wolves know the meadow's open." She'd said we asterisk a dozen times by then, and I'd let it pass, and I let it pass again, but it went into me that morning and stayed. There hadn't been we asterisk on the 2 pines since the river. I'd been an asterisk I alone so long I'd forgot the other word had a use. "You should sleep," I said, which was as close as I could get that early to thank you. "So should you," she said. "You won't, neither will I. Coffee's hot." But the cattleman came in October. His name was Royce Bellingham, and he ran the anchor outfit down on the flats, 4 times the size of mine, and he'd been circling the 2 pines like a coyote circles a sick calf ever since word got around the valley that Eli Thorne had lost his brother and his hands and his nerve all in one bad year. He came up the grade in a buggy with a clerk beside him and a rifleman behind, which told you the kind of man he was, that he brought a gun to talk about a price, and he sat in that buggy in my yard and didn't get down, and he looked at my place the way a man looks at something he's already decided he owns. "Thorne," he said, "heard you was struggling, heard you lost your crew." He let his eyes go over the corrals, the Mendy Dam, the cattle fat on the high bench grass. "Place looks better than I figured, I'll say that. Somebody's been working. Somebody has." "I'll make it simple," Bellingham said. "Winter's coming hard this year, everybody says so. A man alone up here, no crew, you won't make spring. You'll lose the lot in the first big snow, and then I'll have it off the bank for a song anyhow, and you'll have nothing." He smiled like that was a generous thing to point out. "Or you sell to me now, while there's still cattle on it, and I give you enough to start fresh somewhere warmer. I'm offering you a kindness, Thorne. Your brother'd have took it." It was the wrong thing to say. He couldn't have known how wrong. He didn't know Caleb, didn't know the river, didn't know what it does to a man to bury his brother and then be told the brother would have quit. But it was the wrong thing, and I felt the black come up in me, the old killing black, and my hand was near the rifle by the door before I even thought. It was Cora who stepped in. She came out of the barn wiping her hands on a rag, and she walked up easy and stood at my shoulder, not in front of me, not behind, at my shoulder like a partner. And she looked up at Bellingham in his buggy, and she said, pleasant as Sunday, "You're figuring on a hard winter, Mr. Bellingham." He looked at her like he was trying to place what she was. "Hardest in years, Mrs. Almanac and the old-timers both." "Then I'd guess you're short of winter range your own self, down on those flats," Cora said. "I'd guess that's the real why of you driving up a mountain to buy out a man you think's already beat. You don't want the 2 pines for a song. You need the high bench grass and the timber shelter, because if it's the hard winter you say, your own herd on the open flats is the one that won't see spring." She smiled at him, sweet as the biscuits. "Which means Mr. Thorne's ground is worth a deal more to you than the song you're offering, doesn't it?" The clerk's pencil stopped. Bellingham's face went a color. He hadn't expected to be read, not by Eli Thorne, and surely not by the hired widow Eli Thorne had been laughed at for keeping. And the worst of it for him, the thing that I watched land, was that she was right, dead right, and he could see in her face that she knew she was right, and that there was nothing in his bag of pressures that worked on a woman who'd already lost everything a man could threaten to take. "The offer stands a week," he said, gathering his lines, all the smooth gone out of him. "After that, when the snow's got you, it goes down by half." "Drive safe down the grade," Cora told him. "It ices early up here." He went. We watched the buggy out of sight, and I became aware that I was breathing hard, and that the rifle was still by the door where I hadn't reached it, and that the reason I hadn't done some fool thing I'd hang for was standing at my shoulder smelling of hay and horse and wood smoke. "He'll be back," I said. "He'll be back when the snow's deep and he's sure you're beat," she agreed. She turned and looked at me, full on, and there wasn't any sweetness in it now, just the steel. "So we'd best not be beat. We've got near 3 months to get every head we own onto that high bench and into the timber where the snow can't bury them, and the hay in and wood up to the eaves, and we have to do it as if our lives hang on it, because mine does and I think yours does too, though you've been trying to spend yours cheap. I won't watch you lose this place, Eli Thorne. I've done enough watching things get lost." She'd never used my given name before. Eli. It landed in the cold yard between us and neither of us picked it up, and she went back to the barn, and I stood there a grief-broke fool of a man who'd just been handed back his own life by a woman the valley had bet against, and felt, for the first time since the river, something that was not the black. It was small and it scared me worse than the wolves had. But it was there. But I should tell you about the river. You'll want to know why I was the way I was, and she'd earned the knowing of it before that winter was through. Caleb was my older brother by 4 years and the better man of us in every way that counts. The 2 Pines was his dream before it was mine. I'd have drifted my whole life, a cowhand growing old in other men's bunkhouses, if Caleb hadn't grabbed me by the collar at 20 and said we were going to have ground of our own or die trying. We built the place with our hands. The cabin, the barn, the corrals, the dam on Stag Creek, all of it Caleb's notion, and the two of us swinging the hammers. He had a wife once, a sweet woman who died of a bad birth their 2nd year, the baby with her, and after that it was just the brothers and we did all right. We did better than all right. 20 years and the 2 Pines ran 300 head and owed no man, and Caleb used to stand on the porch of an evening and say, "We did it, Eli, you and me. Look what we did," like he could hardly believe it himself. He drowned crossing Stag Creek at the spring high water, going after a heifer that didn't have the sense to wait for the ford. I was on the far bank. I saw the horse go down, and I saw Caleb go under, and I went in after him, and the water took me too and spat me out a 1/4 mile down half dead, and it never gave him back at all. We found him 3 days later in the willows. I dug his grave myself up on the rise where his wife was, because I couldn't stand the thought of any other hands on him, and then I came down off that rise and I quit. I don't mean I quit the work, though I let the work go. I mean I quit. Prout and the Dahlin boy stayed on through the worst of my black temper, and then they couldn't any more, and I don't blame them. I was a hard, mean, hopeless thing to be around. A man punishing the whole world for a creek crossing, and worst of all punishing myself, because I'd been on the wrong bank, because I was alive and he wasn't, because the place we'd built was a knife in me every morning I woke up alone in it. I'd half made up my mind to let Bellingham have it, or the bank, or the snow, to let the 2 pines die so I wouldn't have to keep standing in the wreck of the thing my brother loved. And then a wagon I'd never sent for brought me a widow I didn't want, and she walked into the ruin of all that and started, quietly, without permission, to put it right. The snow came the first week of December, and it came to stay. I'd seen hard winters on the ironwoods, but I'd not seen one like that one in 20 years. It came down for 4 days without let, 3 feet of it on the flat and twice that in the drifts, and the cold behind it was the kind that cracks green wood and kills a man who sleeps wrong. But the cattle were on the high bench, every head, and the timber broke the wind for them, and we'd cut and stacked hay enough. Cora had pushed us at it like a slave driver through November, the 2 of us working dark to dark. And when the storm finally broke and the sun came up hard on a white silent world, I rode the bench with my heart in my throat and found near every head alive, gaunt but alive, pawing down through the snow to the grass, and the hay we'd packed up there in cribs against just this. Bellingham's herd, down on the open flats with no shelter and no high grass, lost better than 1/3 in that one storm. I heard it later. I didn't gloat. By then I'd come too far to gloat at another man's dead cattle, even a man like Bellingham. But I'll own I sat the gray on the high bench in the cold sun looking at 300 living head that by every reasonable account should have been dead, that I myself had given up for dead back in the fall. And I thought about a starving woman saying, "What's a week against everything you've got to lose?" And I had to get down and stand a while with my face against the gray's warm neck, so the hand wouldn't see me come undone. The work of that winter is its own long story, and I won't tell all of it. The hauling of hay through snow to the buckrail cribs. The morning we dug a heifer out of a drift with our bare hands and got her breathing again by the kitchen stove. The night the chimney caught and we beat it out together on the roof in a wind that would freeze the breath in you, passing the bucket hand to hand, and afterward sat on the cold ridgepole laughing, the both of us, soot-faced and half froze and giddy with not having burned to death. And I looked at Cora Vane laughing on my rooftop under the winter stars, and knew the thing I'd been refusing to know since October, which was that I loved her, plain and entire. And that it terrified me worse than any wolf or storm or cattleman, because love was a thing you could lose, and I'd sworn off losing. I didn't say it. I was too much a coward and too much in mourning still to say it. But I started that winter to be a different man around her, and she saw it. And she was patient with it the way she was patient with the bitten gray. She let the hand show itself slow, she didn't grab. We talked, those long dark evenings, more than I'd talked to a living soul since Caleb. She told me about her husband, Tom Vane, a decent enough man and a poor one, a teamster who'd taken the fever and died slow over a hard winter while the doctors bled them dry, and how she'd nursed him to the end and buried him and then sat in an empty rented room with the rent due, and nothing in the world but a saddle and a carpet bag, and a town that looked at a widow with no money as a problem to be moved along. She told me how the men at Halloran's Bend had laughed and made their bet. She told it flat, without self-pity, the way she told everything, but I saw what it had cost her, to climb up that mountain to a man who laughed at her too, because it was the only door left in the world that hadn't yet been shut in her face. "Why didn't you give up?" I asked her once. "Plenty would have. I damn near did, and I had a whole ranch under me." She thought about it a long while, the firelight on her face. "My mother used to say a person isn't what's done to them," she said finally. "She said that's just the weather. A person is what they do back. I'd been done to a great deal by the time I stood in your yard, Eli. I figured I was about owed a chance to find out what I'd do back." She looked at me. "Turned out what I'd do back was save a stubborn man's ranch he was too sad to save himself. I'd not have guessed it, but I'm not sorry." I learned her, that winter, the way you learn a country you mean to live in. I learned she sang under her breath when she thought no one heard, old sad songs, sweet. I learned she could not abide a thing left half done, and would get up from a warm bed to finish a chore that nagged her. I learned that the steel in her had a tired place underneath it, a place that had been carrying too much too long, and that when I started clumsy, late to carry some of it back, to be up first and have the coffee on for her for once, to take the cold chores so her raw hands could heal, she'd go still and her eyes would shine and she'd turn away so I wouldn't see, the same as me on the high bench. We were a matched pair that way. Two people who'd learned to hide the soft places, because the soft places were where the world had hit them. But Bellingham came back in February, like she'd said he would, and he didn't come in a buggy to talk price. By February, his own outfit was hurting bad. He'd lost more cattle to the cold, and worse, he'd lost the high-range gamble. He'd had no winter shelter, and now his herd was starving on the flats while mine grew fat on the bench, and the whole valley knew it, and a man like Bellingham can't abide being known for a fool. He'd decided, I expect, that if he couldn't buy the 2 pines beaten, he'd take it broken, and so one black night near the end of February, he sent men up the mountain to do to me what the wolves and the snow hadn't managed. Rustlers, they'd be called if it came to law, and one of them was named in the end, and it came out he was Bellingham's man, though Bellingham himself stayed clean of it the way that kind always does. 4 of them. They came in the dark to cut my fence on the bench and run my cattle down the back draws to where they could be pushed onto the flats and lost into Bellingham's gaunt herd, brands blotched, gone. A man with no crew can't watch 1,000 acres in the dark. They'd have done it, too, and I'd have woke to half my cattle gone and no way on earth to prove where, and that would have finished me as sure as the snow was meant to. But Cora heard the dogs. We'd taken on 2 ranch dogs by then, and they went off in the dark toward the bench, and Cora was up and at the window before I'd hardly stirred. "Riders," she said, "on the bench. No business there this hour." And she was pulling on the 2 big boots and reaching for the rifle, and I caught her arm. "You stay," I said. "4 armed men in the dark, Cora, that's no place for." "Don't." She said it hard and pulled free, not rough but absolute. "Don't you tell me what's no place for me. I've been in worse dark than this with less reason. They're after the cattle, and the cattle are the place, and the place is the both of us, and I'm not going to sit in a warm kitchen while you go out alone against 4 men and get yourself killed and leave me to bury a second man on a mountain. We go together or we don't go, but you'll not lock me in for my own good. I'm done being kept somewhere for my own good." There wasn't any arguing it. There wasn't any in her at all, and I'd have been a fool to try, and somewhere in the cold scramble for guns and coats, I think I loved her more in that minute than I'd known a man could. We went together. I won't make it more than it was. It wasn't a battle out of a story. It was 4 thieves in the dark who'd reckoned on an easy steal off a beaten man, and what they got instead was 2 people who knew the ground in the black better than they did and weren't beaten at all. Cora circled wide on the gray through timber she'd learned every foot of and came on them from above where they didn't look, and I came up the draw, and between us, we had them caught in the open with the cut fence half-mended behind them and nowhere good to run. I called out for them to throw down. One of them, green and scared, near did. But there's always one fool, and theirs panicked and threw a shot at the sound of my voice, and the muzzle flash lit them all, and a second shot, I never knew whose, took me through the side. I didn't feel it as pain at first. It was like being kicked by a horse, a great numb blow that turned me half around and sat me down in the snow, and I heard my own rifle go off into the dark as I fell, and I heard Cora's voice, not a scream, never a scream, but a great hard shout, "Eli." And then she was firing, steady, 3 rounds spaced like a person who's done it before, over my head into the dark, and I heard horses break and run, all 4 of them, lighting out down the back draws with no cattle, and one of them yelling he was hit. And then it was quiet, and there was just the cold and the snow under me going warm and dark where I lay, and Cora coming off the gray at a run before it had stopped. She knelt in the snow and got her hands on the wound and pressed down with her whole weight, and I heard her talking low and steady, the church bell voice she'd used on the wolves and the panicked herd, the voice that held things from scattering. "Stay with me, Eli Thorne. You stubborn man, you don't get to do this. You don't get to die and leave it half done. Look at me. Look at me." And I looked at her face white over me in the starlight and her hands red with my blood and her holding me to the world by main force the way she'd held everything on that place together by main force. And I thought, with a strange, clear calm, that if I was going to die it was a fine thing to die looking at her. And then I thought, no. And it was the first thing I'd wanted in a year. No, I don't want to die, I want to live. I want to live on this mountain with this woman. It was her that put that in me. The wanting to live. I'd come up there to die slow and she'd cured me of it without either of us noticing. And now that I was bleeding out in the snow, I found I had a powerful objection to dying, and the having of it I owed entire to her. I didn't die, she wouldn't let me. She got the bleeding stopped and somehow, I'll never fully know how, a woman my size hauling a man my size, she got me onto the gray and down off the bench and into the kitchen. And she dug the ball out herself by lamplight with a knife she'd boiled, because there was no doctor inside 40 miles of winter road, and she packed it and sewed it shut with a steady hand while I bit down on a leather strap and cursed and wept. And then she sat by me 4 days and 4 nights while the fever rose and broke. The same fever that had taken her husband, and I know now that every hour of those 4 days she was back in that rented room watching Tom Vane die. And she did not leave my side once, and she would not let the fever have me, and it didn't. I came up out of it on the 4th morning week as the rescued calf, and clear-headed for the first time and I couldn't say how long. The light was gray gold at the window. Cora was asleep in the chair by the bed, finally, bolt upright with her chin on her chest, and her raw hands open in her lap, worn down past the steel at last to the bone. And I lay there and looked at her sleeping, and I made up the whole rest of my life in about the space of a breath, the way a man does when he's been near enough to losing it to know its worth. "Cora," I said. She came awake all at once, the way she did, already reaching for me to check the wound. I caught her hand. "I'm all right," I said. "I'm better than all right. Cora, sit. There's a thing I've got to say, and I've been a year and a coward getting to it, and I near died before I said it, so I'll not wait on it another hour." She went still, wary, braced for hurt, the way she always was, because the world had taught her that's what came when a person had something to say. "When you stood in my yard last fall," I said, "and told me you weren't what I said you were, I was the fool of the valley, and I knew it before Saturday, and I never did carry you down that mountain, and you know why I never did. Not the cattle. I told myself the cattle. It was that I couldn't, Cora. From near the first day I couldn't stand the thought of this place without you in it, and I've spent the whole winter being too broke and too scared to say so. You saved the 2 pines. You saved me, you put the wanting to live back in me when I'd thrown it away, and you did it being told every step you weren't worth the feeding. So I'll say it plain and you can do what you will with it. I love you. I have for months. Not for what you've done, though God knows what you've done, for what you are. I want you to stay, not as a hand and not for wages. I want you to stay as my wife, if you'll have a stubborn, grieving fool that took half a winter to know his own heart. And I want it to be your free choice. Your own and nobody's pushing, because you've been pushed and bet on and laughed at enough for 3 lifetimes, and you'll never be any of that again, not while I'm above ground. Stay because you want to or don't stay at all. But I had to say it. I had to say it once out loud." She didn't answer right off. She sat there with her worn hand in mine and the gray gold light on her face, and her eyes filled, and one tear went down and she let it. She didn't turn away to hide it this time, and that was how I knew before she said a word. "My mother said a person is what they do back," she said when she could. "All that was done to me, Eli, I came up this mountain not knowing what I'd do back. And what I did back was find the one place in the world I was wanted true." Her hand turned in mine and held it. "I'm not staying for a roof or for wages. I quit being grateful for scraps the day I stepped off Ostrander's wagon and you laughed at me, and I decided I'd outlast every soul who ever laughed. I'll stay because I choose it. Because somewhere between the wolves and the chimney fire and you bleeding in my hands, I came to love a stubborn, sad man who finally let me carry some of it for him. Yes, I'll have you. I'll be your wife." A small, fierce smile broke through the tears, And the first thing I'll do as your wife is go down to Halloran's Bend and let every man who bet against me get a look at me running the best outfit in the valley." I laughed, and it didn't hurt. Even with a hole in my side, it didn't hurt, because it came up out of the place where the black had been, and the black was gone, washed clean out of me in 4 days of fever by the only person who'd ever bothered to fight the world for my sake. We were married that spring at Camas Hollow in the little church there, and Cora wore a dress that wasn't a man's boots stuffed with rag. And I'll tell you the truth, half the valley came, including more than a few who'd had money down against her in the fall, and not one of them would meet my eye, and every one of them shook her hand. Bellingham didn't come. Bellingham was gone by then, broke on his own dead cattle and his own bad winter. His anchor outfit sold off to pay his notes, and the high bench grass he'd schemed to steal he never did get an acre of. The man he'd sent up the mountain that night turned state's witness and named him, and there was a deal of talk of charges, but Bellingham slipped the worst of it and drifted south, and good riddance. And I never thought on him again but to be grateful, in a backwards way, that his greed had been the thing that finally got me to say what was in my heart. The 2 Pines came back. More than came back. We hired hands again when there was money to pay them, good ones, men who learned quick that the surest way off the place was to so much as smile sideways at the missus, because she could outwork and outride and outthink the lot of them and proved it daily. And the new men came to respect her the way you respect weather, with no foolishness about whether a woman ought to be able to do a thing she was plainly doing better than you. That bitten gray gelding followed her to his old age and died easy in a sunny corral with his head against her, and she cried over him like he was kin, and I held her, and that was the kind of thing she'd taught me to do, to hold a person while they grieved instead of going off alone to drink it black. We had children in time, that's a private blessing and I'll leave it private, but the cabin Caleb built filled up with the sound of them, and I used to stand on the porch of an evening the way Caleb used to, and I understood at last the thing he'd meant. Look what we did, except now there was a wee asterisk in it again, a wee asterisk I'd thought I'd buried in the willows of Stag Creek, and that a starving widow had given back to me. I took Cora up to the rise once that first summer, to Caleb's grave and his wife's, and I introduced her to my brother the way you'd introduce a living person because it felt right, and I said, "This is the one that saved it, Caleb. This is the one that saved all of it and me besides. You'd have liked her. You'd have hired her in a heartbeat and never laughed at her once. You were always the better man." And Cora put her hand in mine, and we stood there in the high country wind, looking down on the green 2 Pines spread out below us alive and whole, and I felt my brother near, and easy and glad. She's gone now, my Cora, gone these 2 years, and I'm an old man telling this to whoever'll listen, because I want it set down true before I follow her, that the strongest, truest, most capable soul I ever knew came to me wrapped in everything the world had thrown away. A starving widow off a freight wagon that a saloon full of fools had bet wouldn't last a week, and she didn't just last. She outlasted the winter that should have killed us, and the cattleman that meant to take us, and the bullet that near finished me, and the grief that had me halfway in the ground myself. She outlasted every soul who counted her worthless. And the greatest thing she ever did, greater than saving the cattle, greater than saving the ranch, greater even than saving my life with her own 2 hands in the snow, was she taught a hard, beaten, grieving man that a person isn't what's done to them. A person is what they do back. She did me back, and I have been doing her back every day since, and mean to, right up to the rise where she's waiting with my brother in the high country wind. That's the whole of it. That's the truth of how the 2 Pines was saved and who saved it, and don't let anybody tell it to you any softer than that. A woman nobody gave a week did it. She did it all.